Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Thanksgiving week. He is John Canzano at johncanzano.com. I am John Wilner at the Wilner Hotline. Thanks for joining us. We got a lot to talk about. One game in particular to talk about, one rivalry in particular to talk about, and one guest in particular. Was there anyone else to get this week?
Softy. He's the one. Now, full disclosure, if you've never heard Softy before, I want you to hydrate. I want you to find a good place to sit. Make sure you've got both feet underneath you if you're standing while you watch this episode. He's a little much. And our job as part of this interview is going to be to kind of poke him a little bit, rile him up without him knowing that he's being riled up. But we'll do that today. Oregon, Washington, certainly Dan Lanning, big implications this week is, Lanning is 0-3 against the Huskies. He needs this one as Oregon's going to the Big Ten championship game and really needs to get there undefeated to ensure the best possible seeding that they can get, win or lose in Indianapolis. So this is a big game for Oregon. And I think a lot of Oregon fans very much focused on getting some retribution and getting some payback. Will they get it? And in what form? We'll talk about it with Softy. But why is it important we have him on, Wilner?
Dave Softy Mahler at KJR in Seattle is, in my view, he is kind of the soul of Husky football, right?
The national championship was not the apex. It was the bottom of the mountain. And we were going to climb all the way up that bitch. And we were going to win. And we were going to win big with this guy. We had hit the jackpot with this guy.
When I want to gauge what's going on in Seattle, how the Husky fans are thinking, where their passion level is.
I even said on Twitter after the Oregon game in Vegas, we found the next Saban. And now he goes and replaces Saban at Alabama.
Greg Byrne agreed with you.
We were little kids at the front of the line at the roller coaster, and then they shut it down right in front of our face. That's what bothers me, guys. That's what bums me out.
He's the guy, right? And he certainly has a great knowledge of the history of the Oregon-Washington rivalry, but there is no filter, right? There is zero filter. He is coming at us. He is speaking for Husky Nation, I would say.
Yeah. And that fan base, that Washington fan base, I mean, he's the biggest honk in that fan base, and they rally around him and they rally around his show. But also that fan base has been through some stuff, right? They go to the national championship game. They're living on a high. Kalen DeBoer leaves. It felt like it was almost like 5 minutes after the game ended for the title game. You lose the title game. Magical season. They didn't really get a chance to enjoy it. And he leaves, and here comes Jedd Fisch. And now here comes an Oregon team that is undefeated and looking like it could win a national championship. So that whiplash, I'm really interested in that from Softy's perspective and the Washington perspective and how Jedd Fisch is going over and who they'll start at quarterback. But we'll get him riled up a little bit, Wilner. And so without further ado, Softy, Dave Softy Mahler in Seattle, KJR. Softy, how you doing, man? It's big week, Husky week, Thanksgiving week. Where's your head right now?
I was doing great until this thing started, to be totally honest with you. So I just know that no matter what happens the rest of the day, it's all uphill from here after this is over for sure.
Fair.
Good to see you guys, man. And how am I doing? I'm doing good. I don't like the fact that we have Thursday, Friday off from work before the Oregon game on Saturday. I feel like we should all be guns blazing, balls to the wall, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Got a big 4-hour pregame show planned for Saturday as well before the game. And I don't know. I just kind of feel like this game should have been played a week ago, and the Apple Cup should be this Saturday. So maybe you guys can get on that and figure that out for next year.
You did get 2 weeks of a run-up, though. And I think you and I talked about this before. Like, it would have been nice to have 2 weeks in front of the championship game last year, Oregon, Washington, Pac-12 championship. That would have been a fun couple of weeks and some buildup.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I just think that this is just the new way of the world, right? I got a buddy of mine that schedules his family Thanksgivings based on the Apple Cup. He's got family in Spokane. When the game's out there, they go there. When the game's here, they stay here. Not remembering that the Apple Cup was going to get played in September and that this was the week of the Oregon game. So he's going to Spokane for Thanksgiving, and there's nothing going on out there, right? Because UW's back here playing Oregon. I think Wazoo's got Wyoming maybe this weekend. But yeah, dude, I don't know. I just feel like this is just this still takes some getting used to for guys like us, I think, who've been around the game as long as we have. And I just wish that the Huskies had done their part this year, to make this a little bit more of a rivalry game and a little bit more nasty, I guess, this weekend. I was actually thinking about this before I jumped on with you guys, that there's obviously a gigantic monkey on Dan Lanning's back that he's got to shake. And it's the, 0-3 against Washington. But is anybody going to really give him credit for winning this game? This is a 6-5 Husky football team that's 4-5 in the Big Ten. They're 20-point underdogs on Saturday. I mean, good Lord, man, they're supposed to win this game on Saturday. So, Lanning, I don't know, does this do enough to shake that monkey off his back? We'll see.
My mailbag this week, I got 3 questions from Oregon fans going, what is his speech going to be like? What is he going to say before the game? And I said his preparation should be putting on his pants and a shirt and going to the stadium, because this is not a Washington team, I think, that can beat Oregon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so either, to be honest with you. And that's why I don't think it's that big a deal if they win, honestly. I mean, I'm 1,000% with you, John, that this is not really a game that Washington can win. I think it'd be embarrassing for Oregon to lose this game tremendously. I think it'd be a huge feather in Jed Fish's cap to get this thing. It would catapult him into the, December transfer portal window, recruiting over the offseason, all that stuff. It'd be a much bigger win for Jed Fish than it would be for Oregon, because let's face it, outside of totally falling flat on their face, Oregon is in. Only question is, will they have a bye for the playoff, or will they have to play a first-round game at Autzen Stadium? So, look, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck here, which I know you guys don't buy that at all. But if I were an Oregon fan, I'd be like, hey, okay, so you beat a 6-5 UW team. So what, right? I mean, when the games have mattered in the last 3 years, Oregon and Dan Lanning have fallen flat on their face, and that's just facts. I mean, it's like, go back and look at all the games that Oregon's won over Washington the last 20 years. Typically, when Oregon beats UW is not a very good football team. I mean, they beat them in 2018, obviously, when Peyton Henry missed that field goal. But outside of that, when Washington loses to Oregon, when Washington loses to Washington State, the Huskies aren't very good, guys. I mean, Wazoo has not beaten an 8-win Husky football team since the 97 Apple Cup almost 30 years ago. Washington usually stinks when the Cougars beat them. So, John, I don't agree with you. I think Dan Lanning has got to prove that he can beat Washington, and not just beat a bad Washington team, but beat a good Washington team. And there's nothing he can do to stop that this Saturday.
But aren't you really just saying that when Washington stinks, they get beat a lot, and when Washington's good, these games are competitive? So it's Oregon's fault that Washington sucked for like a decade, 12 years?
Yeah.
Like, come on.
No, it's Dan Lanning's fault that in the last 3 games, including the 2 biggest games in Oregon-Washington rivalry history, the Ducks were heavy favorites and couldn't get the job done. Actually, heavy favorites in the second one. I apologize. Dude, and John, I told Johnny Canzano, by the way, do you guys have like nicknames and stuff so we can separate the two, JC, JW, or whatever?
Call me JC. You
okay.
Call him. Yeah.
JW, I told JC on his radio show earlier last week that Washington is going to be able to hold that over Oregon fans' heads for decades. And nothing that happens this Saturday is going to change that. I mean, guys, this is not a good Husky football team. They're just not, all right? They got massive problems on the offensive line. They got massive problems on the defensive line. They don't even know who's starting at quarterback yet in this game on Saturday. At least the media doesn't. This is a game that Oregon should absolutely win, and not just win, but pummel Washington on Saturday. So as I'm walking off that field in Vegas a year ago, and you would have come up to me and said, hey, by the way, I got some bad news for you. You can have this one, but you're going to get your ass kicked in the next one in November. I'd say, where do I sign? Are you kidding me? I would have signed up for that in a second. So I've been expecting this for a year. I've been looking forward to it for a year. It's one of the reasons why I'm not going down there. I have no desire to see UW get murdered at Autzen Stadium. And you know what? If they win and I'm not there like they were 2 years ago when Taj Davis had that great catch on the sideline and they beat Oregon at Autzen, then more power to them. So to me, this does nothing. This does nothing to show that Dan Lanning can beat Washington when it matters. Nothing, nothing, nothing.
So is last year's game kind of the equivalent of what Oregon was able to do for a long time with Kenny Wheaton, kind of hold it over the Huskies?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think when Oregon comes back to UW, you'll probably see that highlight a lot. And I do find it funny that Oregon fans, and look, I mean, to be fair, all fan bases do this, not just Oregon, not just Washington. Oh, you guys are living in the past. All I can do is bring up stuff that happened 20 years ago. Okay, well, all I see when I go to Autzen Stadium is a highlight from 30 years ago, by the way, from 1994. So who's living in the past, for crying out loud? So, but that's part of this, right? I mean, when you have a rivalry game and your rival comes to town, whether going down there or coming up here, we're supposed to stick their face in the mud. We're supposed to play the missed field goal last year. We're supposed to play Dylan Johnson's game-winning run on third down. We're supposed to play Bo Nix with the towel over his head, dropping like he just lost a family member on the sideline. We're supposed to hear and see all that stuff. And now Washington finally has a little bit of an equivalent to the Kenny Wheaton run from 30 years ago. Although I got a feeling, JC, that the Kenny Wheaton run was more impactful for them than the Dylan Johnson run was for Washington.
Yeah, and I think Oregon viewed that like I mean, that Don James and the Huskies had their number, and that was a pivot point, and now Oregon was going to matter. And 70-21, that game, I was at that game. I think you were there too for that one.
Oh yeah.
But is there a 70-21 game coming on Saturday? Is that what we're looking at?
No, this defense is too good. Washington's defense is too good. I mean, you go back to the Iowa game, for example. Jed Fish gave away like 21 points in the second half of that game by going for it from his own 30, 25, 35-yard line over and over and over again in the second half. He just got desperate, gave away a lot of free points in that game. Indiana game, same type of thing. They just got run over in the second half offensively by the Hoosier rushing attack. But outside of those two games, and even Penn State, man, I just don't think that Washington is going to play that kind of way on Saturday because of two things. Number one, their defense is better than that. I mean, look, they may lose 35-10. But 35-10 is not 70-21, right? Like 35-10 is not going to get Jed Fish to come out like Mark Helfrich did, 8 years ago and say, I apologize for the scoreboard, which I remember Mark Helfrich saying that specifically after that loss to Oregon. So I don't see something like that going on this weekend, guys. I just think this Husky defense is too good and they're too fired up for this. I mean, there's some pride here still on this Husky side because there's a lot of guys, not a lot, but there's a few guys, namely Carson Bruner, Cameron Fabiculanen, players like that were a part of that team a year ago that want to walk out of here with 4 straight wins against Oregon. And honestly, I don't know about you guys, but I almost feel like for Jed Fish, if he can cover the spread, that'd be kind of a win for him on Saturday.
Biggest spread, 20-ish since the 2014 game when Oregon had their playoff team. And Oregon won that game, I think, was 45-20.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I just don't see a 50-point win like that coming unless Washington just totally implodes and unless Jed Fish just turns to Damon Williams and says, it's your show. Don't care how you play. You struggle. You're staying in there. Will Rogers is glued to the bench. There's no way he's coming off the bench in any circumstance. This is the 18-year-old's kid game. And frankly, that's obviously a huge storyline for this game on Saturday. I'm kind of wondering if they're better off, guys, with the 18-year-old playing this game on Saturday because I think he might be too young to, know what he's supposed to know. He's supposed to think that this is going to be a pressure-packed situation. He's supposed to go down there and be shaking in his boots. He's supposed to be freaking out and feeling the heat of the rivalry and the Oregon-Washington mystique over his shoulders. And I don't know if a kid from Arizona who's 18 years old even feels any of that yet, to be totally honest with you.
In this era, Oregon's going to spend to the cap. Rob Mullins, the AD, said $20.5 million, $22 million, whatever that number is. They want to get to the cap. They want to spend there. Not everybody can do that. How is that playing right now with the Washington fans and, the fundraising and you've got the Seahawks and a bunch of other things in that market where people spend money.
Yep.
How is that arms race going in Washington's eyes?
Well, I'll just from a fan's perspective, I'll just make a Mariner kind of analogy first because we spent so much time this year. As you guys know, Mariners had a phenomenal pitching staff, but their offense sucked, right? So all we would talk about is, my God, baseball with the expanded playoffs has made it easier than ever to get into the postseason and to win a World Series championship. And you've got the best pitching staff in the history of the game, and you can't even make the freaking playoffs when it's easier than ever to get into the postseason. That's how embarrassing it was for the Mariners this last fall. For Oregon, and I think, John, you may have mentioned this on your show last week, this whole thing is now set up where Oregon and what they're about matters more now than ever, right? Buying a championship is more in play now than it ever has been in the history of college football. And if Oregon can't do that now with what they've got at their disposal, I'm not just saying this year, I'm saying, next year down the road, because at some point the rules are going to change. I think at some point there's going to be, some kind of, reeling all of this in. I have no idea what that looks like or how that looks, down the road. But for now, this is absolutely set up like the Yankees in baseball, to just go out and buy a World Series championship every year or buy the players necessary to win a World Series championship. So honestly, if Oregon can't do it now, when are they going to do it? When is it ever going to happen? If they can't do it now with Uncle Phil's money, oozing out of his eye sockets, flowing like, water into Autzen Stadium. If they can't do it now, when are they going to do it? So I think that's number one. Number two, for Washington, remains to be seen. Remains to be seen how motivated people are up here. It remains to be seen how fired up they are to donate money. I mean, John, as we talked about the other day, there's a lot of options up here for the sports fan dollar. The Seahawks, the Kraken, the Storm, the Sonics are coming back. The Sounders are now in the Western Conference Final again with Brian Schmetzer, doing his magic all over again. So there's a lot of options up here in Seattle. You go to Eugene, Oregon, and you ask people, hey, we need you to donate to a sports cause. Who are they giving their money to? The Blazers? The Blazers are freaking terrible. They're awful. They're almost a stain on the state right now. They're so bad. There really is no other option for anything worth giving money to right now besides Oregon football and Oregon athletics. So if they can't do it now, they're never going to do it. But up in Seattle, it just kind of remains to be seen if we have the stomach for something like this.
Where does Oregon fit on the list of most hated sports teams in Seattle?
I would say for most college fans, it's number one. For most fans in Seattle, are probably number two behind the 49ers, to be honest with you. Because in the end, this is a Seahawk town, right? It really is. I mean, it's been a Seahawk town for 50 years. It's a very, very good baseball town that is middle of the road when it comes to attendance for a terrible, terrible franchise who's never made the World Series. So being middle of the road is pretty damn good, to be honest with you. But I would say for Husky fans, they're absolutely number one, and they're number one more so now than ever because the rivalry with Washington State isn't as nasty, I think, as it used to be. Because let's face it, they're a second-tier program now. And they were kind of a second-tier program to begin with, honestly. But now they might even be, between number 3 and number 2 as far as their tier. I mean, this is a, team that's no longer in a, Power 4, Power 5 conference, struggling for relevancy, struggling for survival. I think if they would have put together a solid year and gone like maybe 10-1 or 11-1, whatever, maybe people would have been kind of maybe, caught off guard by that. And they would have been more apt to kind of, be bothered by what's happening in Pullman. But they're not good. They're an 8-3 football team that lost to an awful football team on Saturday in Corvallis and Oregon State. So the rivalry with Washington State, sadly, I think is kind of taken a little bit of a beating with this transition to the Big Ten. And now Washington, Oregon guys, John, there's going to be a generation of fans, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids that have no idea the Apple Cup is supposed to be played in late November. And they're going to grow up like I did, thinking the Oregon game is the big rivalry because it's played every year at the end of the season. So Oregon, the rivalry with the Ducks, I think, guys, is just going to go up and up and up and become even nastier as the years go by.
You've got to, though. Washington has to play well, though. I mean, if they're not competitive in this thing, if they don't find footing, if let's say Fish just he turns out to be an 8-win guy, or the NIL money's not there. You can get to 7.5 or 10 million, but you can't get to 20 million.
Right.
The Oregon fan base is gonna pivot to Ohio State. I mean, they're gonna say that's our rival all of a sudden. How would that fly in Seattle?
Fine. I mean, I don't care what Oregon fans think. Why do I care what Oregon fans think? I mean, honestly, I mean, if Oregon wants to run around thinking that they're on the same level as Ohio State, then you better win multiple national titles, because that's what Ohio State's all about. I mean, you want to just, see, now I'm telling you, I don't care what Oregon fans feel. And now I'm telling you why I don't care what Oregon fans feel. All right. So just don't hold me to this. You got me all going here, John, for God's sakes. If they want to feel like they're on the same level as Ohio State, then go out and be Ohio State. Win multiple titles, win Big Ten championships, get multiple Heisman winners, be on that level. And I don't think they are on that level right now. And honestly, I don't know if it's going to be ever possible for Oregon to be on that level because of geography. I mean, just Honestly, I mean, there's a lot more coverage out there of that team than there is your team down there in Eugene. So if Oregon fans feel like that's their new true rival, then that's great. But I just know this, that in the two biggest games in this rivalry's history, Washington won. They've won 3 in a row. They've won, 4 out of 6 or 5 out of 7, 5 out of 8, whatever the hell it is right now. The 12-game thing is over. That's in the past. There's people out there that have no idea what the hell we're even talking about when it comes to stuff like that. So I don't know. I just feel like if Oregon fans want to take this thing to a new level and think of somebody else as their rival, then start acting like it, because there's one thing you haven't done, and that's win a freaking national championship.
Whew.
How can you be on the same level as Ohio State if you've never won a title?
Well,
Ever.
that's why this game for Lanning, he beats Ohio State earlier in the season. That was
and he acted like he won the Super Bowl, by the way. You
it
saw
was
his reaction.
a big win for Oregon,
Sure.
given the Washington games last year and Oregon State 2 years ago. And now he gets another shot. That's why I think Saturday's game is big, because if he trips again on Washington then goes to the Big Ten championship game and loses to Ohio State, Wilner, you tell me, what's Oregon's seed when the bracket comes out? Are they like a 9? Are they an 8? Are they hosting? I don't know. But I think this is a big one. I think he's got to put his foot on Washington's throat.
Yes.
And say, hey, look, Huskies, your thing of the past. We're moving on to Ohio State. That's a bigger game for us. And he has to act that way.
Boy, they would drop. If they lose both, I think they'd probably end up in a 6-7 window. They'd still host.
Yeah.
But they would not. You don't want to be 6 or 7, because you certainly don't want to be 7, because then you end up playing probably the SEC champion in the quarterfinals.
I mean, in that way, this game Saturday, it's a huge game for Lanning as far as positioning and seeding, because you can go to Indy and you can lose to Ohio State, and you can be a 5 seed. And you're still sitting pretty, but you can't lose both these games.
Well, there's two things I guess we're kind of talking about here simultaneously. Number one is, what does it mean for the playoff, right? And then what does it mean for the Oregon-Washington rivalry and Dan Lanning's role in the Oregon-Washington rivalry, right? Because so far the guy's 0-3, and all 3 losses came to Kalen DeBoer. I'll remind you again, he's 0-3, but all 3 losses came to the previous head coach. So to me, this would be a bigger loss, I think, than it would be a win for Dan Lanning.
Sure. Yeah.
He's supposed to win this game. He's supposed to wake up and just roll out of bed, not even worry about taking a shower, just skip breakfast, come right to the game, dial up a couple of, bread and butter plays, keep the playbook, plain as day, save some stuff for Ohio State, and whip Washington. So he's supposed to win this game. So, again, I just feel like Washington fans kind of think that's what's going to happen on Saturday, John. We're hopeful. I'm hopeful that UW can make it a game in the fourth quarter. And if it's a game in the fourth quarter, somebody falls down, whatever, there's a big penalty. Lanning does something stupid again, like he's done a couple times in this series, like he almost did against Wisconsin, last week, obviously. Something like that can maybe matter in the fourth quarter of this game on Saturday. But I'm not sweating this game. Like, guys, the game in Vegas, I've never been that nervous for a football game in my life. Not even the Super Bowls with the Seahawks, not even Rose Bowls with Washington. That was the game to win the final ever legitimate Pac-12 championship against your rival, against those bastards, and hold it over their head from now until the end of time, when everybody, including Johnny Canzano, was telling us how Oregon is they're a different team now. They're fired up. You got them all angry. You woke them up in week 6, and they're playing incredible football to be an almost 10-point favorite and then lose that game and choke it off the way they did, and have UW come out and, almost whip them in the first half before Oregon made it a game in the third quarter. That game is going to resonate with me forever. And it's honestly one of the reasons why I'm not pissed off at Kalen DeBoer for taking off to go to Alabama. So a lot of Husky fans disagree with that, guys, but I'm not sweating this thing at all on Saturday. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
I want to ask you about that real quick, especially after Alabama's disastrous performance at Oklahoma.
Right.
How much glee are Husky fans taking in the fact that Alabama's 3 losses and probably out of the playoff?
Lots. I mean, I'm trying to figure out what would be, more the glee that Husky fans are taking and watching DeBoer struggle, or the glare coming off Canzano's head right now with those lights he's got in his office. I mean, either one, they're both very strong, right? And honestly, I fall into a different bracket, and I've admitted that. And I know, guys, that I'm in the extreme minority of Husky fans up here in Seattle, but Husky fans are loving this. They're loving what's going on in Alabama. There's a lot of schadenfreude, if you will, going on down there. They just love watching this guy struggle. They're calling him a Benedict Arnold. He's getting what he's reaping what he sowed. He never should have left. He's too big for his britches. Could have had a dynasty in Seattle. Instead, he chooses to go down there and take over maybe the toughest job in the history of college football ever, replacing Nick Saban with that fan base. So yeah, I would say out of every 10 Seahawks fans, John, I'd say 9 of them are loving, maybe 9.5 are loving what they're seeing down in Tuscaloosa.
Oregon's a good job. Washington, you've got 2 ADs that have left. You got a coach that has left.
Right.
Is there a fear in the fan base that it's a stepping stone?
For what? For Alabama? Yeah. For Ohio State? Yeah. For Michigan?
Nebraska? Yeah. USC?
Well, Nebraska, I mean, there's a lot more to that Dannon story, by the way, than people think. Okay. I mean, I know you guys have done some digging on that, and I know that you're aware of the Troy Dannon situation, but this is a guy who never should have been hired in the first place. That was more of just a complete fumbling by Anamara Kause, the president at Washington, than anything else, in my opinion. He was a square peg in a round hole from the start. I've said it on the air, and I'll say it again to you guys. I don't know if you guys want to bleep this out or not, but the guy was a dick. I mean, he was not a nice guy to be around. He was a really hard guy for a lot of people to get along with, and he was not going to last here in Seattle. The culture that Troy Dannon wanted to install was not the culture whatsoever up here in Seattle. So that was the wrong fit at the wrong time from the start. And then, look, Jen Cohen was here for 20 plus years, and left for one of the premier jobs in sports. Kalen DeBoer left for one of the premier jobs in sports, if not the premier job in college football. So, if they had taken off to go to a smaller place, but USC, Alabama, I got no problem with that. NFL, is it a stepping stone? Meaning, is Washington no longer a place where someone's going to stay 15 years at? Yes, I agree with that, because I don't think that there's really any job in college football for the most part, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 of them, where you can expect the coach to stick around that long. But, look, I mean, do we think Lanning's different? Do we think that Dan Lanning is going to be in Eugene for 20 years? Of course not. I mean, at some point, the NFL is going to come calling. At some point, the dollars are going to be way too big. At some point, the allure of not having to recruit, not having to worry about the NIL aspect, and just go coach football is going to be too strong for that guy, and he'll take off too. I promise you, he's going to take off too at some point. Only question is when.
You got a score prediction for us? I know you got to run here. Get to the Jedfish news conference.
I'm okay for a few minutes. I mean, I can see maybe like a 37-20 type win for Oregon. Maybe UW's down 20 whatever, and they come back, get a garbage touchdown, and they cover and lose the game by 17 or so. I just think the Husky defense is too good to allow this thing to get out of control, where it's like it was in 2016, like JC mentioned there. But I think a 37-17, 37-20-ish around there is likely what's going to happen.
The Washington offense, who's he going to start at quarterback?
I think he's going to start Damon, but nothing would surprise me with this guy either way. But I would just, if you put a gun to my head, I'd say number 2, because I don't think he can wait to see Damon Williams start a football game, honestly. I think Jed Fish is like a kid on Christmas morning waiting for his parents to wake up so he can start opening up his presents. He just cannot wait to see what Damon Williams can do. And, I've been around this program a long time, and I've never heard a head coach talk about a player and the future the way Jed Fish does. And I realize things are different now, obviously, with the NIL and the poachers and the portal and all that stuff. And you almost have to talk differently now than you did maybe 10, 15 years ago, if not even 5 years ago. But Chris Peterson, Don James, guys like that would never sit there in a press conference in November and proclaim a guy to be a starting quarterback for the following season until there was a competition in spring ball. He would never proclaim an 18-year-old kid to be the future face of the program until he deserved it and until he earned it. And he hasn't done any of that stuff yet. I mean, there's been sparks, obviously. There's been little, moments of wow, for Damon Williams, for sure. We saw that against, UCLA in the second half, where the guy looked amazing coming off the bench. But this is a whole new animal on Saturday, right? Versus the Oregon Ducks. I mean, if I'm Dan Lanning, I'm probably preparing for both of them. I don't know how much you really have to prepare for Will Rogers, to be honest with you, because they face quarterbacks like him. They haven't faced a lot of quarterbacks like Damon Williams, though. So I would expect that the majority of Lanning's preparation has been on, getting ready for number 2. But guys, again, I've never been around a head coach that talks more about the portal in December and what we're going to do when the season's over and what's going to happen come January. And here's my future face and here's my starting quarterback next year. I'm sitting there, last week thinking they got a game. Like they got 2 games to go. And we're just skipping over all that stuff and going right to the offseason, man. It's incredible.
It's the new world. It's a new era.
Yep.
Softy, we love you, man. Thank you for coming on and giving us some of your wisdom. I'm not as optimistic about Washington's offense on Saturday. Oregon's D has been really good. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 7 or 10 for the Huskies.
7 or 10 points, so maybe like a 31-10 or a 38-10. What's your final score prediction?
Something like that. Yeah,
38
I think Oregon covers. I think Oregon's gonna, Lanning's gonna have that vein coming out of his neck. I think. Yeah. It'll feel like the Colorado game last year, but I'll give Washington no more than 13 points.
Yeah.
Like 7 or 10 maybe.
I mean, I can see it 38 something, whatever, 38-17. I just think that your idea, though, about because that 2016 game, even when Washington wanted to stop scoring points, Oregon couldn't do anything about it. I mean, that was just a tragedy for Oregon that day. And that was a really, really bad team that was about to fire their coach. That's not the case up here in Seattle, man. So I don't see it getting out of control like that. But I do agree with you that I think Dan Lanning is going to want to murder these guys on Saturday. He's going to wake up and his eyes are going to be bulging out of his sockets. He's going to look like Marty Feldman showing up there from Monty Python on the sideline, doing that whole thing. Tasha's going to be getting them all fired up, banging heads against each other. Maybe they come out too fired up, right? Maybe the emotion hurts the players and maybe the emotion hurts the coaching staff. I mean, JW, you remember, the last 2 years, Derek Harmon, who's playing D-line for Oregon, he got killed by the Huskies 2 years in a row. At Michigan State, he got spanked. So there's a lot of reasons why Oregon's going to want to drop a hammer on Washington on Saturday.
Well, Softy, we appreciate it. The disdain for Oregon is just endless and hilarious to listen to.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It keeps people like us in business, right?
And you package it in such a intelligent way, right?
Well,
it's not like
let's not go too far. Let's not go too far.
Like going into a sports bar with you.
Yeah.
You've thought this whole thing through.
When I had you on radio last week, I had a caller who called in and said, I'm never going to listen to you again. You gave that guy a platform.
Yeah.
But you know what? I like dissenting viewpoints.
Of course.
I think it's good.
Well, I think that same person that called in is probably going to tune in after the game is over just to hear what you say about kicking Washington's ass. By the way, this is how much I can't stand Oregon. I have had this picture on my phone now for a couple of years. Remember when they hired Dan Lanning, the photo that Oregon sent out? So if Oregon falters in the national championship game, I can't wait to put that one out on social media right there. Remember that?
Right. Yeah.
When they claim they hired a guy that won a national championship at Oregon, and let's make this graphic about our new head coach. So I can't wait to use that one, baby.
We'll see. All right, Softy, you're the best. Thank you, man.
Thanks, Softy.
See you guys, John. We'll talk to you tomorrow. All right, bye.
Alrighty. Sounds good.
Right. There he goes.
The one and only. The
Wilner.
One and only.
What? Love the energy, love the emotion. I think we've got to have him on once a year, once a season. But I love how he shifted it in his mind that there's no way that this is going to be a bad outcome for the Huskies on Saturday. And I actually think there's a bad outcome out there for Jedd Fisch because he's about to go out and try to get into the portal and try to recruit. And if Oregon kicks their teeth in and Dan Lanning can walk around saying, hey, Washington's a thing of the past, come to Oregon, all things being equal. You got guys like Jabbar Muhammad who did that in the offseason. I think there's an opportunity here for Oregon to make this a really bad outcome for Washington.
I do too. If it's not competitive in the second half, if it's 38-3 at halftime, something like that, I totally agree with you. I mean, they are going to be competing for the same players, recruits and transfers. A lot of this whole dynamic between the two teams is going to come over time is going to come down to NIL and the revenue sharing, the resources. Is Washington going to be able to match the Ducks, right? That's the big question. Oregon is all in with football. USC is all in, and Michigan and Penn State and Ohio State. My question for Washington, are they all in as well? If they're not, it is going to be hard for them to compete for the Big Ten title on a regular basis for the next 6-8 years.
I had somebody ask me what I thought the typical top 25 team would spend in NIL. If the top teams are all spending at the cap, let's say it's $20.5 million that they set that number at, what should we expect in the top 25? And so I asked a couple of ADs this, and I said, what do you think the spending would be like? And what do you think from playoff teams spending will be like? And one AD said that they believe that there's a correction coming, or maybe they're being wishful, that there's a correction coming in the NIL space and that you're going to see some teams try to moneyball it, right? And so Washington might be one of those programs that has to try to moneyball it and get along with spending $10 million instead of $20 million. But over time, I think there's going to be a separation at the top of college football. Those top tier teams that are going all in should separate. But I think we'll see some stories. We'll see some teams that are spending $2 or $3 million who punch above their weight and get into the top 25, or make a run at being the 12 seed every once in a while. But I think this is a really important game, and it's not lost on me. Remember how they used to bellyache if one team had a bye in front of the other game? Yeah. They're both on a bye week. Yep. Both coaching staffs have been out recruiting. They've been hearing it, and they've been recruiting against each other all week long for some of these players. So I am curious what Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoi and Oregon's coaching staff thinks about going in and just winning this game and getting ready for the Big Ten championship game versus going in and making a statement. I think we'll find out how much this game means to Lanning by the scoreboard.
I think he will take make every effort to run it up. And that could be important if they end up losing the Big Ten championship game to Ohio State. There is a victory margin component built into the metrics that the committee uses. It is capped, and I don't know what that cap is. They haven't released it, but the metrics do take into account victory margin. I mean, we saw Ohio State punch it in with like 1 second left against Indiana to go from 31, whatever it was, 15 or something, 17 to 38-17. I would imagine Oregon's going to do the exact same thing.
Well, Oregon did it at the Big House. Remember in that game against Michigan, they could have taken a knee and ended the game, and Dan Lanning kept playing. And Ohio State's got Michigan this week, and so they're all playing for different stakes. And we don't know what the committee's going to do yet. I think part of the fascination that I have in watching what the committee does week to week is looking at the results and then trying to figure out how the committee interpreted it. And so I'm eager to see what happens after this Oregon-Washington game. I'm eager to see how much the conference championship games will matter. I think it'll be it's all new, right? Because it's a 12-team playoff, but it's certainly great stuff from Softy.
Yep. And it's hard to know, like you were saying, it's hard to know what they're going to do. It's hard to anticipate. I don't think they know. I think they have no clue what they're doing, which isn't their fault in the sense that it is all new. It's 12 teams instead of 4. You got the at-large piece, and you got the automatic qualifier piece, and you've also got the conference realignment. They're dealing with an 18-team Big Ten and 16 in the SEC and 16 in the Big 12 and ACC. And a lot of these teams aren't playing each other.
Right.
So the points of comparison that allowed them to form the basis of their rankings don't necessarily exist. It is an entirely new structure, and I think they don't know what they're doing. And some of their decisions, Texas 7 ahead of Georgia, even though Georgia won at Texas by 2 touchdowns, it doesn't make sense. So guessing along with them is really difficult this year.
Yeah.
And it's understandable to a certain extent.
You hit on one of my biggest peeve with the season. The biggest peeve I have with the entire season is the fact that you've got 18-team and 17-team and 16-team conferences. You've got one conference playing 8 conference games. Everybody else is they're missing half the opposition. Yeah. And so I find not only is it difficult to try to decipher who should be in front of who, but these tiebreakers and 8 or 9 teams being eligible for the conference championship game with a week or two to go. It's that sounds exciting, but it is a little bit infuriating because I just want to make sure the best teams get to where they're supposed to get. And I don't know if we might have some real problems here in the next week.
Well, the Big 12 is like a whole different animal, right? There's 4 teams tied for first, and I think there's as many as 8 that could end up winning the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think the Big 12 is going to be like that on a regular basis because they don't have the equivalent of an Ohio State or a Georgia, for instance. But in the Big 10 and the SEC, the jockeying and the item 4 in the tiebreaker, item 5 in the tiebreaker. It's going to be really interesting how this unfolds in the next few years.
Hey, instead of doing our most interesting games of the week this week, let's do something a little different with the holiday theme. What are you thankful for, John Wilner? And we'll tie up our episode. It can have a little college football, a little personality to it as well. But what are you thankful for?
Well, certainly health and happiness of my family. I am thankful for our podcast. It's been fantastic for the last. Are we on year 3? I think we might be.
Yeah,
at least.
I'm looking forward. I'm living in the now.
All right. But I love doing this with you, and I love the fact we've gone video, and hopefully it's helping fans kind of get through the whole wild, wacky world of college sports.
I'll say this. I'm thankful for my family. Obviously, I've got 3 daughters that keep me on my toes, and a wife who is my anchor and tent pole. But I'm thankful for this podcast. I'm thankful that people are interested in college sports and interested in the end of this college football season. It feels more relevant than ever. I'm thankful that the Pac-12 is out there fighting for relevancy and hasn't just evaporated.
Yeah.
I'm thankful too for the fact that we're living in a world where like sports can be a diversion still. I worried for a little while there 5 or 6 years ago when sports started to get really hyper politicized, and it can still be a place where we go to escape, and it doesn't have to feel as complex as the real world, although NIL and the portal make it feel that way sometimes. But these games have been amazing. The drama is amazing. How many more teams and fan bases are interested in what's happening at the end of the season? This is all good for the game, good for the sport, and it's good for the podcast.
Absolutely. I thank you very much. And thanks to all of our listeners, all of our viewers. Please make sure to hit the subscribe button. He is John Canzano, johncanzano.com. I am John Wilner, the Wilner Hotline. We thank you. Have a safe and happy Thanksgiving, and we will be back next week.